Dr. Patton has won numerous journalism awards and citations from the William Randolph Hearst Foundation, the Society of Professional Journalists, the National Association of Black Journalists, Scripps Howard Foundation, New York Women in Communications, and the Education Writers Association. In 2015, Dr. Patton was awarded the Vermont Vernon Jarrett Medal for her national commentary and reporting on race. In addition to her child advocacy work, Dr. Patton is a research associate at Morgan State University's Institute for Urban Research in Baltimore, Maryland, and she is an assistant professor of journalism at Howard University in Washington, D.C. She is also the author of That Mean Old Yesterday, a memoir, Spare the Kids, Why Whooping Children Won't Save Black America, and the forthcoming book, Strung Up, The Lynching of Black Children and Teenagers in America. I think you all are in for an absolutely wonderful presentation this week and next. As always, we thank you for being here. Please put questions into the Q&A as opposed to the chat. It will make it easier for Irene and myself. We have over 800 folks on and climbing. And without any further ado, Dr. Patton, all
Thank you,
yours.
Nicole. Thank you, Dr. Habib. Good morning, everybody. I'm so happy to be here with you today. I have lots to share. Let's get started. I want you in your space, wherever you're sitting, to say a really, really important sentence out loud. Are you guys ready? Here we go. Childhood is about surviving adults. Childhood is about surviving adults. And I want you to hang on to that very simple yet powerful sentence as we go through this journey today. I am case number KC114343 from New Jersey's child welfare system. As Nicole indicated, I am an adoptee, child abuse survivor, who aged out of the system at age 18. But I always knew while I was in the child welfare system that I would spend the rest of my life doing work around the treatment of children and corporal punishment specifically, and looking at its harms and trying to convince people that they need to abandon this practice because it is harmful for individual children, for their development, their growth, their future prospects. It's harmful to families, it's harmful to individual communities and to our nation. And so this morning, what I'm going to do is take you through part one of this journey. We're going to learn about history. We're going to look at some data. We're going to look a little bit at the trauma behind hitting, but we're going to do more of that next week. But part of doing this work means we have to have some really uncomfortable conversations. And so I warn you that what you're going to see and hear today will be disturbing, but I want you to sit in that discomfort because this is where change begins. So some things that you're going to see and hear will, make you feel disturbed, but we've got to deal with this because there are children across this country who are living with this issue. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and get started here. Let me do present full screen. Okay. Nicole, can you hear?
Good.
Okay, great, perfect. Thank you very much. Okay, all right. And as Nicole indicated, the slides for this presentation and next week's presentation will be made available to you so you don't have to sit there screenshotting everything. Okay, let's get started.
For our kids to
that's a little loud. Let me put that down. I'm gonna start with giving you guys a sense of how problematic the discussions about corporal punishment tend to be, particularly within African American communities. So I'm going to show you a series of videos to sort of ground this conversation.
For our kids to excel, we have to accept our responsibility to help them learn. That means putting away the Xbox, putting our kids to bed at a reasonable hour. It means attending those parent-teacher conferences and reading to our children and helping them with their homework. And by the way, it means we need to be there for our neighbors' sons and daughters. We need to go back to the time, back to the day when parents saw some kid fooling around, and it wasn't your child, but they'll whoop you anyway. Or at least they'll tell your parents. Your parents will, you know.
Okay, so here we have former President Barack Obama, the nation's first Black president, giving a keynote address at the 100th anniversary of the NAACP. He's in a room full of a few thousand Black people in New York City, lecturing Black parents about what our duties are. And if we can do a good job parenting our kids, then we can make improvements in our communities. And as you just heard, he made a joke about whooping children, that in order to, achieve these goals, we need to not only put our kids to bed, read to them, help them with their homework, but also go back to the days when if someone in the community saw your child acting out, they could snatch them up and whip them and then send them back home, and the child would be beaten again. Now, here is a biracial man who grew up between Hawaii and Indonesia, and in places and cultures where this kind of folklore didn't necessarily, swirl through the cultural ecosystem. But in order to authenticate his Blackness and connection with that crowd, at the NAACP meeting, he draws on an old trope about whooping children, even though he and his wife, Michelle Obama, explicitly said that this was not a parenting practice that they endorsed, and actually found it damaging the one time that they did it to their own daughter. So the message here is that it is not structural racism. It is not divestment in schools. It is not systemic, issues that have traversed across generations. We need to look out for other people's kids and whip them and send them back home to be whipped. Let me show you something else.
Mom, I just failed my history class.
I'm whooping your ass.
Man, why you get so excited to whoop me? I'm going CPS. Man.
Well, shut your ass up.
Didn't I tell you to stop playing? Sit your ass down somewhere, boy. Go in the room. Go.
Okay! Back to me. Back I'm here. Sorry. Go in your room and don't come out.
Mom? Hey, what are you doing? What did I do? What did I do? Ah! Mom! I'm not moving. Mom! Mom! Stop. Oh, grab the back.
You know what you did.
I really don't know.
Sit y'all ass down. Then I tell your ass to get in there and sit down.
I had 3 Mountain Dews in the refrigerator. One is missing. Don't nobody know? Take y'all drawers off. Y'all both get ass whooping.
Hey, baby, what you want to talk to your mama about? Hey, Ma, I took $20 out your purse. So you want to steal?
100 racks and one thing about the flood that. Okay. Money. Okay. Okay. Money. I don't want it. I just passed it. It's lit. I like the 504 boys, I move through the live, babe. Sip up full of play, been hot just to show you the time.
What you doing?
Nothing.
You hungry?
Yes, ma'am.
All right, let's go. Let's get something to eat.
useless human being. I'm going to McDonald's. What do you want from there?
Large cheeseburger, meal, fancy, no ice, please.
And that's it. That's it.
Yeah.
Are you sure?
Yeah.
So what you just witnessed was a genre of what I call maternal drag. What we are seeing are young men who are reenacting their traumatic boyhood experiences. These types of videos go viral on digital platforms such as TikTok, Instagram, and Facebook, and they garner lots of laughter and lots of people who take to the comments and share their testimonials about growing up and receiving this kind of physical punishment. Or the other reaction is that, oh, this is misogynistic. These are Black males who are dressing up and making fun of Black women, their mothers, their grandmothers. But quite frankly, I see something else. The digital space becomes the only way for these young men to process their trauma, to try to be seen, to say, this is what I've been through. And this is the only way they can do this, through a kind of, comedic humor that does not get them, shut down by folks who are, calling them sexist. So we see these types of videos going viral on all kinds of platforms, mostly started with the millennials, and now we're also seeing Gen Zs do this. These are just a few of the videos that I have aggregated. Let me show you something else.
Whoop your kids, whoop your kids, beat your kids' ass, beat your kids' ass, whoop your kids, whoop your kids, beat your kids' ass, beat your kids' ass, whoop your kids, whoop your kids, beat your kids' ass, beat your kids' ass, whoop your kids, whoop your kids, beat your kids' ass, beat your kids' ass, whoop your kids, whoop your kids, beat your kids' ass, beat your kids' ass, whoop your kids, whoop your kids, beat your kids' ass, beat your kids' ass, whoop your kids, whoop your kids, beat your kids' ass, beat your kids' ass, whoop your kids, whoop your kids, beat your kids' ass, beat your kids' ass, whoop your kids, whoop your kids, beat your kids' ass, beat your kids' ass, whoop your kids, whoop your kids, beat your kids' ass, beat your kids' ass, whoop your kids, whoop your kids, beat your kids' ass, beat your kids' ass, whoop your kids, whoop your kids, beat your kids' ass, beat your kids' ass.
Also swirling around in the digital universe is a genre of rap music with hot beats. Maybe some of y'all were sitting there bopping to it. I mean, it's a bop, it's a cool beat. It's designed to get into your nervous system, make you feel good, so that what you're feeling overrides your critical thinking skills about what you're actually seeing on the screen, and the dangerous messaging that is embedded in these types of videos, which you can find on YouTube. You could just do a quick YouTube search and do whoop your kids, rap songs about beating kids. It's all there. And so what happens is you get these animations and pictures flashing across the screen with the music in the background. But when you are able to really stop and look and see what's being promoted here, is all out aggression toward even sleeping babies. There's the one guy whose fist is drawn up over a toddler that's sleeping on the couch. And also it embeds these messages that if we don't whip our children, then they will be beaten by the police, or they will be killed. And there's also a lie embedded in this video that says the law says that you cannot discipline children. That's simply not true. Every single state has a law which describes specifically the appropriate way to strike a child's body. But we also have to respect and pay attention to the fear that is embedded. This is a real fear among Black parents and communities that their children could be lost to state-sanctioned violence, which I'll get into in a second. Let me show you something else.
Black people have been parenting legally parenting their children for only 150 years. Now, if you factor in Jim Crow, it's only 50 years. Toya Graham was not a hero for chasing down, cursing out, and assaulting her son on national television. Get the f over here! But I empathized with her fear. I understood why she needed to intervene in that moment. What I was disgusted by was the media circus created by it. We need you to be a mammy, that bridge between the interests of a white authority and your thug son.
Black people hit their child 92 times. In the eye, in the nuts, in the feet. That's where the real pop locking came from.
Goddamn. Goddamn. You don't remember what somebody used to do. I didn't do it no more. I didn't do it no more. I didn't do it no more. Goddamn, you won't even do it.
I will fuck a kid up. Don't get mad at me. I'm just saying what you can't say. You feel the same goddamn way I feel.
Wait. Why are you crying? Okay, listen. Listen.
Switch.
If you check the latest statistics from the Department of Health and Human Services, last year alone, black women, black parents put 375 children in their graves as a result of child abuse. A disproportionate number of the perpetrators are black women aged 40 and under. We need to deal with that reality.
It was love, and I want to really show that he's not a gang. We don't come from this.
Tonight, the uncle of a slain teenager defends what he calls an act of love. The Terrytown teen made internet headlines after he was seen being disciplined by his uncle for claiming to be a gangster just last week. The young man was shot to death outside of his home.
Tell him about that. Tell him that. Tell him about show him that. Show him that. Facebook that. The gang member, huh? No, I smoked the weed last night too, huh? Raise your hand or stomp your motherfucking ass.
Toya Graham and legions of other black men and women are parenting their children under a racist system that is designed to distort and destroy and kill their kids. So what we have to stop doing as black people is, becoming co-conspirators and participants in the dehumanization process.
I don't spank. I whoops. Yes, I was whooped, therefore I shall whoop.
Okay. Bend over! Bend over! Mommy! He's myself! Say one more word! Say it!
Now I want you all to take a minute, just a moment, wherever you are sitting, and just breathe. Think about what you just saw, what you just heard from a president joking about the whole community being able to snatch children up and whip them, to young men putting on robes and head rags, reenacting their trauma in a jokey, funny way because they have nowhere else to turn to process what happened to them in healthy ways, to rap music, making child abuse sound cool and a good thing to do, to what you just saw on this video. I want you to ask yourselves, how did we get here? How did we get to this place where we have normalized, joked about, celebrated, advocated that people hurt children's bodies in this way and call it love, call it teaching, call it religion, call it good public health practice. How did we get there? I want you to think about this for a second. I teach digital storytelling classes at Howard University. So I teach young people how to use their cell phones primarily to tell journalistic stories. And so when you think about the videos that you just watched, I really, really want you to think about the process that goes into this. A parent must pick up a cell phone and find a good place to record this moment, this traumatic moment between themselves and their child. Or they might enlist a sibling to hold the cell phone, right? Regardless of age. So the sibling has to become a witness and a recorder of that traumatic scene that's going down in the house. And so there's this interaction, there's the talking that leads up to it. And any of y'all who have ever gotten spanked, hit, whooped as a child, you know what that process feels like in the body. You know how your stomach feels, how your hands get all sweaty, how your heart starts racing, how your breathing changes in anticipation of the pain that's about to come from the person who's supposed to love and protect you. And so the parents record this moment going down and they get it on tape. They get the crying, the hitting, all of that. The process is not over. Now, while your child's body is undergoing biochemical, neurochemical responses, trying to come back to baseline, trying to regulate their heart, their emotions, all of those things, here you are on a cell phone getting ready to post this thing. So you go to your Facebook page, your Instagram, Twitter, maybe YouTube. You give the thing a title, you give it a description, and then you post it. You market it first. And then the people come. Sometimes it's a few dozen in your curated circle. Sometimes it turns into hundreds and potentially thousands or even millions of people who get to witness this traumatic moment between a parent and child. It doesn't stop there. That child who may be 10 years old in that moment will be 15, will be 18, will be 25, will be 30, will be 40 years old someday, and will be able to log on to a digital platform and be re-traumatized all over again. So we need to do some serious work to look at how this kind of digi-punishment is normalizing child abuse, normalizing this kind of traumatic parenting, and do something about it. And ask ourselves, why is this okay for this type of abuse to circulate on digital platforms? So I shared these with you because I want to give you a sense of how this conversation on corporal punishment is so dysfunctional. Not only do we hear the music, the speeches, we see, these viral videos, but we see memes like this that circulate. So for those of you who specialize in trauma, what are the messages here? What are these people trying to work out? Here is a young person who has vitiligo, and they decided to make this into a meme, joking about how Black parents threaten to slap the Black off you. I admit, my adoptive mother used to tell me that all the time. I will knock your teeth out. I will slap you into next year. I will slap the Black off. And what did that kind of messaging do to me, to my sense of identity, my sense of self? I literally stood there, trying to imagine what it would look like for my skin color to disappear. And it sort of laid the seeds for this kind of internalized racism and self-hate. So we see these sorts of things circulating. But we have to get beyond the viral stuff. And we have to start dealing with numbers, right? And start grounding parents and communities in how this viral content, the joking, the toxic ways that we talk about this produces these kinds of outcomes. And so we need to start talking about the impact of physical abuse. Okay. And so what we see are increasing numbers of folks who are embracing physical, we see increasing numbers of children who are being abused or suffering high rates of maltreatment. Some years ago, myself and Stacey LeBlanc, who you heard from last time, decided to do a project. I was down there in New Orleans, and we were trying to get police officers and churches to become involved in changing the discussions about corporal punishment. So I said to Stacey, you know what, we should put together a heat map where we look at abuse fatalities in New Orleans and police shootings. I'm sorry, homicides. And so what she did when she created this map and took it first to police officers, she showed them this map, and without telling them what was on it, and the police automatically responded and said, "Oh, those are homicides, just regular homicides." But when she put both of them together, she said, "Nope, these little spots here are not homicides, they're child abuse fatalities." And then she put both maps side by side. And so what you can see here is there's some, correlation here. When you give young people a foundation that begins with violence, that changes their brains and their nervous systems, forecloses opportunity for critical thinking and problem solving, should we be surprised that they might grow up to become adults who engage in violence in our communities? Now, we're not saying that, whipping your children, turns them into killers, but we have to start thinking about these public health outcomes when we talk about the treatment of children in early childhood. America is leading in terms of annual deaths for child abuse. Okay, we lead all other countries in the industrialized world on this issue. We have to look at the growing rates, child fatality rates in this country. We have the latest data that's just coming out, I believe. So this will be updated when I send you all the slides. During COVID, we saw a lot of media stories about how the rates of child abuse, of fatalities, had gone down during COVID, and people were celebrating. And I'm looking at this with a side eye, like this is not accurate, because during COVID, we were on lockdown. Mandated reporters, primarily school teachers and such, did not have their eyes on children and were not seeing what was happening. What we do know from anecdotal evidence is that there was an increased rate of young people who were calling in to report child abuse on hotlines, sexual abuse, physical abuse as well. So we don't really have a true picture of what really went down during COVID. Some of that is still being unpacked. But what we do know is that during that period when the national numbers for child abuse fatalities were going down, they actually climbed to their highest rate for Black children nationwide. One of the things I hear from Black parents when I do community conversations on this is they say, if I don't whip my son, especially, or my child, the cops will kill you. And so I respect that fear. We've seen national conversations about it. We've witnessed a whole country during the Black Lives Matter movement debate whether unarmed children deserve to die. The fear is real. But I also have to give people the numbers, the data. And so during that period, the Washington Post and other media outlets began tracking police killings of people. And so they looked at, they presented numbers between 2013 and 2018. For some reason, after 2018, they stopped tracking these numbers. We can make all kinds of assumptions about, why that may have happened. So what I did was I disaggregated from those databases the number of Black children who were killed by police officers between those years. Those databases allow you to disaggregate by race and by gender and by age. And so during that time, we have 41 Black children who were killed. During that same time, there were about 46 white children who were killed by cops. But white children's numbers, the population is much bigger. So we get the disproportionality here because Black children make up a smaller proportion of the nation's population. And so on the other side, I decided to go through the annual child maltreatment reports, which I read religiously. And I disaggregated the number of Black children who were killed by their own parents. And so, ladies and gentlemen, the sentence goes like this. Between 2013 and 2018, 41 Black children were killed by police officers. And during that same time period, 2,389 Black children were killed by their own parents. That's a tough sentence to swallow. And I don't say this in a Black on Black, Fox News, Black on Black crime sort of way. This is the data. Both sets of data are disturbing. Both are public health problems. But the reality is that while the fear is very real among African American communities, the fact is that Black children are more at risk of being seriously injured or killed by their own parents as opposed to the police. Let's look at some more numbers. Another thing I did was I put together some micro data from the National Data Archive on Child Abuse and Neglect, which is where the annual child maltreatment reports data comes from. But they don't have micro data like this. And so I wanted to do a breakdown of total Black child fatalities, the number of Black male victims, female victims, and to break it down by perpetrators. So the numbers that they had available for me at that time were between years 2015 and 2020. And so during that time period, you see over 3,000 Black child fatalities. This is all pre-COVID. And then as you see in terms of raw numbers, Black boys are killed more than Black girls. And in terms of perpetrators, Black women kill children in higher numbers than Black males. And so we also have to pay attention to the type of abuse that causes these fatalities. And what we see here is about 42% of these fatalities are physical abuse. So we see that for 2020 and 2021. And we'll have the latest numbers out pretty soon to update those charts. We also know that there's an international movement. There's a global movement to prohibit corporal punishment of children. So there's this myth that corporal punishment exists everywhere, has always existed everywhere. This simply is not true. Now I'll get into the historical roots in a minute. But we have growing numbers of countries that are banning corporal punishment in homes and in schools, including countries in Africa. The US is basically the only country that has not signed on to the UN Declaration on the Rights of the Child, which prohibits corporal punishment, okay? The science tells us that the majority of substantiated cases of physical abuse involve physical punishment. So a lot of people think when they think about child abuse and child abuse fatalities, that these are people who are monsters beating their kids. That's simply not true. Over the years, I have examined police case files, social work case files. I've served as an expert witness on child abuse case files. And you hear the parents every single time. I didn't mean to hurt my child. I didn't mean to kill him or her. I hit them the wrong way this time. So you have a parent who's frustrated, who's dysregulated, who had a bad day at work, and they go off on their kid. Maybe the kid tries to run away, hits their head on the corner of a table. The child is hit in the chest. Now they've got internal bleeding. These are not monsters who are trying to intentionally harm their kids. These are people who rely on physical discipline as a parenting practice. Okay, more data that bears this out in terms of folks who are hitting their kids, but also they give the breakdown of what's leading to this type of a child abuse related homicide. So, young children soiling their clothes, spilling juice, disobeying a directive, throwing a tantrum. These are all normal developmental behaviors in children that are leading to their deaths. Approval of physical discipline is a prerequisite for physical abuse. So, meaning we live in a culture, in a society that jokes about hitting kids, preaches about hitting kids, makes music about hitting kids, laughs at a former president who says, you know what, we should go back to the days where people could give communal whippings. All of the stuff we see in the digital ecosystem sets the stage for people to normalize hitting children. And then that leads to the potential escalation of physical discipline to then become abusive. And as children's bodies grow, what happens? You have to hit harder, right? And so we see how these injuries happen. The research shows us that spanking a child raises the odds of physical abuse. Spanking also raises the odds of parents hitting with an object. As a child, I was hit with belts, hangers, switches, broomsticks, combs, brushes, anything that she could get her hands on. And so what is the most prevalent risk factor for child abuse in the US? Social norms. Okay, and I'm sure my friend Stacey LeBlanc talked to you all about this, right? And what social norms are. And the research also bears this out. So we have, based on peer-reviewed journal articles, that people start hitting their children as young as 3 months old. They can't even speak, right? And so we also know that between age 0 and 3, there's a lot of stuff going on in a child's brain. There's a lot of foundational things happening. So what happens when you introduce hitting and yelling and other forms of toxic stress during this crucial developmental moment in a child's life? We've got people reporting, spanking their 1-year-olds. 30% of 1-year-olds are spanked at least once by their parents. So by the time kids are 2 to 3 years old, before they even enter kindergarten, the majority of children are being hit by their parents. Social norms. It used to be okay to smoke while you were pregnant, to drive kids around in cars like this, to ride bikes without helmets, right? We don't do these anymore. So I'm hoping for the day where hitting children is no longer an acceptable social norm, okay? We also have to talk about the intersections between spanking and sexual abuse. When I was writing my book, Spare the Kids, there was a chapter that didn't make it because I was 50,000 words over my limit, but I interviewed Black women who had received physical punishment, but also suffered sexual abuse during childhood. And in my interviews with these women, I asked why they didn't disclose what was happening. And some of them said that their mothers caught them touching themselves, and so they got a whooping for that. Or they were afraid to tell that so-and-so had touched them because they were afraid that they were going to be beaten. And in a very heartbreaking way, many of them said, well, the sexual abuse was better than getting a whooping. And so we have to start thinking about the intersections between these. Hitting a child on their body is a violation, right? And as is sexual abuse is a violation. And so what happens when you are hitting a child, you are telling a child that they don't have the right to ownership over their own bodily autonomy. And so this gives permission, it primes them to be victims to people who touch them in other ways, or to become a perpetrator themselves who victimizes other people. Some years ago, the mayor of DC, I'm coming to you from the DMV, used Twitter to list the names of missing girls in the district. And the public was outraged. And most of these girls were Black. And they said, you know, if these were little white girls who had gone missing, there would be outrage. The FBI would be involved. There'd be investigation. These girls are likely sex trafficked, and so on. And I was looking at that conversation and I said, something's not right here. The FBI was not involved. And so I looked into this deeper. And what I found is that those girls who were on those lists were runaways. And a couple of them had been sex trafficked. Some of them were repeat runaways who were brought back home by the police. And as soon as they got home, they were met with a whooping by their parents. And so they kept running away and going back to their pimps. So in their minds, it's better to be with my pimp than to go back home where I'm being traumatized. And many of these girls who report being sex trafficked had already experienced either physical or sexual abuse at home. And so we have research that says, look, if we stop spanking kids, we'd have fewer children who, you know, are exposed to physical abuse. And I would broaden this to say, if we eliminated physical punishment as a parenting tool, we could heal so much in our society: domestic violence, drug abuse, right? Political violence, and so many other things. I could do a whole lecture on how early childhood stress is foundational to so many of our social problems. I'm also of the mind, as a historian, that so many of our social justice movements in this country have failed because we have not centered children, the treatment of children, as foundational to all of these other issues. We also have research that looks at, well, where are parents going to for advice on discipline? And so we have Black and white parents listed here. This was the study that just looked at those two groups. And so what we see here are more white people going to pediatricians versus Blacks, but we have to be careful with that. It's not that Black people are incapable of understanding science and medicine. It's just that Black people have long held suspicions about white medicine, given that doctors experimented on Black bodies for much of our history, were discriminatory in terms of their treatment in these clinical spaces, that white medical professionals used their journals to argue that we were inferior, that we were unhealthy, that we were deviant, that we needed to be castrated, all of those sorts of things. So there is this intergenerational trauma that informs our fear and suspicion about white doctors who try to give us advice. As we can see here, more Black people go to their religious leaders than white people on this, which is also problematic because too many Black ministers have this very fundamentalistic interpretation of Old Testament scripture about hitting kids. And then we're about equal in terms of mental health professionals and then other professionals. Everybody knows what racism is, sexism, you know, and other types of isms. But when you ask people, what is childism? Lots of people have never heard of this term, but it is absolutely foundational to helping us understand why so many people normalize hitting children. Okay. Childism is these everyday, you know, prejudices and treatment of kids that we don't think about. It's just normal. Think about when you're arguing with another adult and you say, don't talk to me like a child. That is childism. That is an admission that you understand that children are disrespected. Children are considered less than, right? Children are considered irrational, in need of control and coercion, right? And discipline. The fact that if I, as an adult, hit another adult, I can be arrested for assault. But every state in this country, it is codified in law in every state that you can hit a child. That is childism. It is legal in 18 states to be able to hit children in schools. What other places do we allow this to happen, right? Or happen at all with adults? The fact that it is legal, that it is okay, is a form of childism. I love this little infographic here that I've designed for y'all. I hope that you might screenshot this one actually and print it out today and put it on your refrigerator, put it on, your desk somewhere. So this is the childism scale. This is a way for you to determine where you fit on this scale. I am proud to admit that I am number 6 on this scale, the subverter. I elevate children in my words and deeds. I believe that children deserve the exact same rights to bodily integrity and autonomy as adults, that they should be free from physical punishment and coercion. I understand that children have the capacity to manage their freedoms, to make choices, to think for themselves in different developmentally appropriate ways. I believe that we need to meet children where they are. Okay. And so I want you guys to take a look at this and see where you are on this and try to get to number 6. The takeaway here is that childism is this prejudice and discrimination that is foundational to what we're talking about today. We live in a country that believes that children are inferior. That is the basis of this. So let's talk about some myths that we often hear. I often hear people say there's a difference between spanking and abuse. This is absolutely false. Now, I know some of you might be like, what? There's got to be a difference. Nope, there's no difference at all. Depending on my mood, I say, oh, it's just the spelling. This is just semantics. Let me explain why. A child's brain only responds to stress hormones. The brain's job is to keep the body safe. Now, when a child hears you yelling, sees you about to raise your hand, whether the hand is empty, whether the hand has a switch, a belt, extension cord, it does not matter. The brain's job is to say, uh-oh, danger, danger, you're about to be unsafe. So the adrenal glands that are sitting on top of your child's kidneys do not make the distinction between what the parent is calling it. The brain's parts, right? The hippocampus, the amygdala, all of those parts, all of those parts that are engaged do not privilege the hitter's semantics. The adrenal glands don't say, oh, wait, bruh, don't shoot off cortisol. That's just a spanking. Don't shoot off cortisol because the parent's intent is to teach. That's not how this works. The child's brain does not make the distinction. Sexual abuse, physical abuse that leads to visible injury, and corporal punishment that do not leave signs of physical injury are all toxic stress events. All 3 trigger the exact same biochemical responses in a child's brain. All 3 change the architecture of a child's brain. All 3 flood the child's body with stress hormones that could place them at risk for negative health outcomes later on in life. There is no difference between spanking and abuse. Adults just tell themselves this so that they feel better or can absolve themselves from using violence. And these are the other semantics that people like to play around with this. Spank, whip, tap. I wish I had $1 for each time someone said that hitting was not violence. I could pay off my student loan bills. So a lot of adults have actually been physically abused during childhood, right? But they rename it, they call it something else, right? Well, we also know the data tells us that most abuse does not actually go reported, okay? A few years ago, the American Academy of Pediatrics and the American Psychological Association fortified their stance against corporal punishment. I was part of some of those discussions. And these associations said, look, y'all, we've got decades of research that shows there is absolutely nothing positive that comes out of hitting children, right? The research is bearing this out. And so they called for a ban on spanking. And they said that clinicians and pediatricians and other child well professionals need to start having conversations in the clinical space, in the exam room with parents about how damaging this is. These are just a few of the expert organizations that have come out against hitting children. So there is a consensus in the scientific community that spanking kids is harmful. We've seen brain studies. So a few years ago, I interviewed Dr. Martin Teicher at Harvard, who had done scans on the brains of adults who had experienced corporal punishment, not substantiated child abuse. It was corporal punishment, regular physical discipline that did not result in a physical injury. And what he saw were brain changes, particularly in that prefrontal cortex area of the brain, the top brain, the least evolved part of the brain. The oldest part of the brain is that reptilian part of the brain stem. And so this part of the brain where you need for good thinking, critical thinking skills, emotional regulation, memory, all of that, there's changes there. Right. And so he saw those compared to people who did not get physical punishment as children. And during our interview, I said to him, Dr. Teicher, this is really fascinating, but I think you need to add, another group of people to this study. And I said, you need to add those who did suffer physical abuse. And what he saw was basically the same, right? So if to think about it this way, you've got three groups of people who've never been hit, those who got regular physical punishment, and those who were abused. These two groups here, those who were physically abused and those who got regular corporal punishment with no physical injuries, had the same brain changes, same structural changes in the brain. Further evidence to show that there is no difference between spanking and abuse. We have more studies that show that people who have been physically punished have more activation, brain activation in response to threat than people who have not. So if you're sitting as a child, right, in anticipation of a whooping when you get home, when you get dysregulated and have to go into survival mode to survive a spanking, a whooping, whatever you want to call it, this is how it changes the brain. And so we see how kids can be in situations like schools and foster care where I was, where they're always danger mapping, always looking around for a threat. And we see this with adults. We see it in our social media interactions with people who just they will go from 0 to 100 really, really quickly. Okay. So more science that you can take a look at on your own with these slides. This slide is important because we see here in terms of the beneficial outcomes here, none of these studies that researchers have done have found any beneficial outcomes from physical punishment. We also know that parents lie when they self-report about spanking. A lot of parents will say, well, I don't do it when I'm angry. I do it as a last result. I'm calm. I sit down with my kid and I talk to them. Well, we have real-time audio recordings that show this is not true. They actually do the exact opposite of what they say they do. Here's a helpful infographic here based on Elizabeth Gershoff. I'm an Elizabeth Gershoff groupie. She is my God. I worship her and her research. When I was young and I started reading her stuff when I was in graduate school, I was so validated by her findings. And so she did this huge, study looking at the research. It was a big meta-analysis on the research on corporal punishment, and found in over 75 studies, different countries, more than 100,000, close to 200,000 children, that there's these externalizing outcomes, behaviors that result in hitting kids. So some years ago, there were psychologists Dieter Deckard and Dodge, who wrote this paper looking, calling it the cultural normativeness thesis, which argued that, you know what, Black children don't experience the harms of physical punishment the same way white, kids do. And people embraced this. Black people embraced it, white people embraced it. And what it did was it then put generations of Black children at risk for continued intrafamilial violence. And it shaped policy. It shaped the way judges made decisions in court cases. It shaped whether people decided to screen out calls for child abuse. It shaped therapeutic interventions because people thought, oh, this is what Black people do. That's their culture. It's normal. They laugh about it. They preach about it. They joke about it. They think it's going to save them from the police. They think it protects them from racism. So because it is normal within their culture, within their neighborhoods, within their communities, their churches, Black children are not harmed by this. But later on, when Liz Gershoff did her meta-analysis, and even before that, there were other people who tried to repeat their studies and could not find it. And these two psychologists eventually came around and said that they were wrong. Some years ago, I was expert witness on a child abuse case in Dane County, Wisconsin, when a Black stepfather whooped his daughter, hit her in the face with belts, injured her. And his defense attorney hired a Black woman psychologist as an expert witness to come in and say, yep, this is normal within our culture. Hitting Black children with belts, including in the face, is normative because this child was disrespectful. And if Black children are disrespectful and they go out into the world and do this, it could get them killed. I was irate. This was during COVID when this happened. So y'all know I had to, sit down with everything, all the studies that I knew about epigenetics, about brain science, about transgenerational trauma, all of these sorts of things, and my knowledge of history in terms of where this parenting practice comes from, and set the record straight. And I wrote my anticipated argument, turned it in. 2 hours later, we heard from their attorneys, and the perpetrator decided to plead out. And so we have to use accurate science. We can't make these kinds of, arguments to say some group of people's children's brains are different than others, that some children are more resilient to pain and trauma and stress, so that there's no need for us to intervene. The way people talk about their trauma is culturally influenced by the ways we're exposed to other people talking about what happened to us. But the brain is a brain is a brain is a brain, right? Unless you believe in racist pseudoscience that once trafficked in our cultural ecosystem that said Black people are insensate, their skin is tougher, and they don't experience pain the same way. This was the kind of thinking that justified whippings on slave plantations, medical experimentation on Black bodies during slavery and during Jim Crow, and also the state-sanctioned killings that we see. I think about Eric Garner in New York, who was killed on the streets in Staten Island. And you look at the autopsy reports after that, this fixation on his body, right? Rather than on the violence that was meted out on him that led to his death. The research shows that doesn't matter where your kid is. China, Italy, New York, Brooklyn, DC, does not matter. Okay, so it does not hit, outcomes with physical punishment do not vary by geographic region, right? A brain is a brain is a brain is a brain. We have this, we have studies also to show that the majority of parents across racial and ethnic groups embrace hitting kids. So a lot of people think it's just Black people, that Black people hold a monopoly on this kind of violence against children. It's just not true. We live in a country that embraces hitting kids. There's studies that show, there's one study, Kathy Taylor down in New Orleans, who took a look at Southern Black mothers beliefs about corporal punishment. So she sort of had these intimate discussions with them and asked why. And many of them believe that spanking is love. And we hear this from people, I whip you because I love you. Right? I whoop you because I want to protect you. Certainly my adoptive mother made me feel this way. She would say to me, I'm an 80s, 90s kid. I whoop you so you don't get in trouble. I whoop you so the police won't kill you, so the white man won't kill you. I whoop you because the white man doesn't want you to have X, Y, and Z. And I was like 7 years old looking at her like, who is this white man she keeps talking about? Was it Bob Barker from The Price is Right? Was it Alex Trebek? Was it Ronald Reagan? I didn't know who this elusive white man was. The only person I thought was going to kill me because she kept hurting my body was my Black adoptive mother, who was saying that she did this to me because she loved me. Did not feel good at all. Didn't feel like love. And when you hit a child and you say you're doing it because it's love, think about what it's doing to the wiring of your child's brain. And so then we wonder, we get all dissonant when a girl child grows up to get in an abusive relationship with a man, or some other significant other. We wonder, well, how did that happen? Well, you were the first to teach her that hitting was love, or a boy child who may end up in the same situation or become a perpetrator. This is the foundational moment when messages of love and pain merge together and become part of their child's neurology that sets them up and primes them for other kinds of dysfunctional behaviors. Okay. We also have had studies that said, look, warmth can mitigate the potential negative outcomes of hitting kids, right? So I hit my kid every once in a while, but I hug them. I love them. And so that way they're not damaged by this, right? And so we have studies that show warmth does not matter. The opposite is actually true. When you come down eye level with your child, when you soothe with them, when you regulate with them, right? They're better behaved. So warmth, cultural normativity, race, these are not moderators. They still have the same outcomes. Okay. And so I'm going to talk more about this in our next session. So I'm just going to speed through just to give you a teaser. We have to start thinking about spanking as toxic stress, okay? That lays the foundation for aggressive behavior, defiance, elevated hormone levels, precocious puberty, depression, drug and alcohol abuse, obesity, inflammation in the body, the weakening of the immune system. I will get into this in more detail in our next session. I will show you this as well. We have to start thinking about corporal punishment as a multi-organ, multi-system process. What you see here, all of these parts that you can't see under the skin are engaged in this process. Okay, so we'll get into more of that next time. You all can take a few seconds and scan this QR code, okay? And the password for you to get into this is Patton 27, Patton with a capital P, 27, all one word. Okay, so you can download this and get a sneak preview in preparation for next week's session, okay? Myth 2, whooping children is a Black thing that African Americans brought from West Africa. Happy Black History Month, by the way, because y'all are about to get some history. This is a lie. There is zero evidence that Africans, pre-colonial, the term here is pre-colonial, before they met white people, before white people came to the continent and stole everything. Right? Change languages, change government systems, change the way people interacted in natural kinship with their children. There is zero evidence that this type of ritualistic parenting practice existed in these cultures, particularly West African cultures where African Americans came from. Not true. So there'll be people who say, oh, they stole everything from us, our languages, our religions, our this or that. But whipping children was the one thing that survived the Middle Passage experience. Here's the thing. The majority of those people, those stolen people who were forced onto those ships were young people. These were folks who had often not finished childhood, who had not yet given birth to kids. Okay. Um, these were people who came from different cultures, different regions, spoke different languages, held different beliefs about children. They did not come here with a universal parenting, pamphlet that said, when your Black child acts up, grab a switch or a belt, and then read spare the rod, spoil the child to justify doing this. This is not what happened. And in many indigenous cultures across the world, this type of parenting practice did not exist. It is a gift of colonialism, imperialism, white supremacy, and structural racism. If we want to understand the evolution of corporal punishment in African American communities, we do not begin in the United States, in the South, with slavery, with Jim Crow. We don't even begin in Africa. We go to Europe. Now, a bunch of white guys have written books about this before I was even born. So I have the footnotes in Spare the Kids, so you can see where the historical roots of corporal punishment comes from in European cultures. Okay, I'll talk a little bit more about this. Okay, so we have to start talking about decolonizing Black parenting. So I wrote this piece in the American Psychological Association's journal, arguing that corporal punishment in Black communities is not an intrinsic cultural tradition. It is not native to us. It is a result of historical trauma, our experiences during slavery, which set the foundation for what we see today in terms of the child maltreatment outcomes. It is epigenetic. It is in our cells. It's not just in our cultural experiences and our ideological thinking. It is a biological response to trauma, to feeling unsafe. And we need to talk about the historical roots of this with accuracy. So that article will help you. When the American Academy of Pediatrics came out against their corporal punishment, I interviewed Black pediatricians, and I was highly disturbed by the conversation. There were many Black pediatricians who reacted negatively to the AAP's announcement that we needed to do this, and also the APA, the American Psychological Association. I talked to clinicians there as well, and they thought that this policy change was demonizing Black parents and communities and setting them up to be arrested by police officers. They argued that we can't raise Black children the same way we raise white children. And so it was a totally disturbing set of conversations that I had from professionals who took an oath to do no harm. So what became clear to me is that we have pediatricians and psychologists who don't keep up with the literature of the field, who don't keep up with studies on trauma and transgenerational trauma and epigenetics and neuroscience, which is really disturbing to me. And so we talk about decolonizing Black parenting. What does this mean? We have to show parents how the way they're, disciplining their children, those ideas, the way we talk about it, laugh about it, do it, are formed by systems of oppression, and that we inherited our thinking about children, the childism that I was talking about. We inherited our parenting practices from the Europeans who colonized us and subjected us to centuries of trauma as a result of slavery, Jim Crow, state-sanctioned violence. We talk about how corporal punishment perpetuates anti-Blackness in terms of, the language that we use, in terms of the violence itself. We have to talk about whiteness as a system of violence in terms of ideological expression, in terms of practices, and in terms of the dehumanization of children. I have to take people back to Europe to talk about trauma in European cultures. White people lived in cultures where there was feudal wars, poverty, plagues, religious persecution for centuries. This history has been written. I'm not making this up. And so when you have a people who have been subjected to centuries of violence, right, over and over again, it changes you. It changes you on a cultural level, but it also changes you biologically and at the cellular level. And so the white people who ended up in North America, they were Europe's worst. Sorry to say it, but they were the criminals. Many of them would have been executed had they not been exported to North America or to Australia. These people came with trauma in their bodies. These people came having been shaped by systems of dominance, by, hierarchy, by corporal punishment, right? And so when they came to this new environment with all of that stuff encoded in their bodies, and they encountered indigenous people, they didn't have the kind of regulation for cooperation. No, they're like, we're going to take this from you and we're going to kill in the process. Meanwhile, they continued beating their own children. So generations of white children endured colonial violence to keep that transgenerational trauma going within white cultures. And then you have this system of slavery where you take these people from a different culture and make them your new children. So slavery in America was modeled off the old treatment that white children endured in Europe. And we get this violence perpetuating. And so then Black people internalize it, indigenous people internalize it. People across the globe who are colonized by Europeans internalize these violent ideologies and behaviors, and we've kept it, the traumas going. Once again, we have this data that shows that, look, the majority of people across race and ethnicity, with the exception of Asian groups, this chart there, Asian groups are not disaggregated and broken down. They're all kind of lumped in. But the majority of people across race and ethnicity embrace hitting their kids. Black people do not hold a significant statistical majority on this, embracing this tactic, and also across education, because a lot of people think that it's just poor single Black mothers who embrace this behavior, and that's not actually true. We see a religious gap on spanking, born-again Christians, not born-again Christians hitting their kids. You can ride across parts of the South and see billboards where they have in big letters, "Spare not thy rod," right? Many of the schools that embrace corporal punishment are in the South, in the Bible Belt region. Okay. So when I talk about decolonizing Black parenting, we have to talk about language. We have to ask, I've asked Black people, what were we? How do we think? What did we say? How do we treat children before colonization, before we were enslaved, before we had to deal with generations of racial trauma? So you take things like the Christian Bible verse, children, honor thy father and mother. That's from the Bible. And the Bible is also a colonized document. It's been changed and rewritten and, interpreted by Europeans. Okay. So we have this verse that, a lot of people say, the Bible says, honor thy father and thy mother. This is not African thinking. This is not indigenous thinking. So we can go to parts of Africa and see an inversion of this. Honor a child and they will honor you. See the inversion? The child who asks questions is not stupid. So we say, stay in a child's place, speak when spoken to, answer when called. That's a colonized parenting. It takes a whole village to raise a child. Children talk with God. In many of these pre-colonial West African cultures, people believe that children were superior to adults, that children were gods, that they were reincarnated ancestors. Babatunde, father has returned. Yetunde, mother has returned. These are Nigerian naming practices. Children were mystical. They were magical. They could make themselves disappear. If you hit a child, it diminished you as the adult, or you could drive away their spirit guides, and then you leave a child vulnerable to wreaking havoc on a village. Let not your growing child hate you, right? So we can look more at these parables. The child is to be treated very carefully, right? To see pre-colonial thinking about children, not just in West Africa, but in also other indigenous cultures. There's a great book called Free to Learn by Peter Gray. I believe that's his name, Peter Gray. It's a wonderful book. And there's a chapter in there that gives you a kind of global breakdown of indigenous parenting practices. And there are cultures today where people don't hit kids. They don't even yell at children. Okay. All right. So these are more parables that you can take a look at and share with parents. And whenever I do community conversations on this and I have the big screen up, the whole audience is, their cell phones are in their hands taking pictures of these screens. And that tells me like this is new and it actually feels good. It's not fear-based. It's celebratory. It's not infused. These phrases are not infused with dominance and hierarchy and just downgrading and dehumanizing children. Again, when we talk about what happened to Europe and to children in Europe, we have these old images and slaughters of kids. It's embedded in the art. I'm not sure what's happening with my screen, y'all. Hold on. Sorry about this.
All good.
Okay. Canva sometimes acts janky. I don't know if y'all use Canva. Woo. Let's try it again. Okay. Let's see. Let's try this now. Is it? Okay. Can y'all see this? Somebody say yes.
Yes.
Look, okay, perfect. Okay, so we see embedded in European art the slaughter of babies, mass infanticide. It's in the folklore, it's in the fairy tales. My next book is on the lynching of children, of Black children. But the story, once again, does not begin in the Jim Crow South with Black children as victims. The lynching of children began in Europe with white children, going all the way back to the medieval period. And I come forward to England, where the youngest child that I see publicly hanged was a 10-year-old. And so then we cross over into North America, and I've got a huge Excel file with lots of names of kids who were publicly executed starting in the 1640s until we get to about 1870s. And most of the kids who were publicly hanged, executed in American history were white children. And then after slavery, after emancipation, lynching and these types of public executions become Black children. And so we see this in statues, popular statues across Europe, this expression of violence, and degradation of children all over the place, embedded in the culture. So your big takeaways here is that there's no historical evidence that West Africans embrace beating kids, right? They were mostly kids who were brought here. The majority of the captives were young, right? And that, hitting children in our cultures is a byproduct of colonization, slavery, and indoctrination into Christianity. The majority of Black people, well, none of those Black people who ended up on slave ships were Christians. Christianity is not native to African Americans. Certainly Christianity existed in North Africa, but that's not where African Americans came from. They came from West Africa, which was colonized later by Christians, right? When they were justifying taking people's bodies. Black people were introduced to Christianity here in the United States under the context of slavery. And for the first 100 years, Black people did not actually speak English. Okay. So they weren't reading Bibles. They weren't saying spare the rod, spoil the child. Okay. And they were actually, it was illegal for them to learn to read and write. So this was a slow, our coming to Christianity was a slow evolution. Okay. And that's, I don't say this to say we shouldn't practice Christianity. You can't do African-American history without understanding the role of the church. But our churches need to interrogate and purge some of the toxic ideas that we have infused in terms of our misinterpretation of scripture. What we do see happening in Europe are all these horrible things happening to white children, right? It took Europeans centuries to get to a point where they started recognizing the humanity of children, or even a biological difference between adults and children. If you look at old art, they appear as miniature adults, right? Like sort of kind of like muscular, right? And so they have an entire age of enlightenment where they're starting to have this slow evolution toward treating children differently. And in the United States, the same thing sort of happens until we get to the progressive era. When people start looking in the late 19th century and early 20th century, studying children's developmental behaviors, how their brains work, how their bodies grow. And much of that whole child-saving era campaigns that we saw with the with the establishment of pediatrics as a specialty, with child psychology emerging in the early 20th century, where social work gets established, but really toward the middle of the 20th century, is actually largely in response to emancipation. Here we had 4 million Black people who were suddenly free, and half of those were kids. And so white America was all dysregulated about this. What is it going to mean to be a citizen? My kids have to compete with these free Black people and also white immigrants who are coming here. And so all of these professionals coalesced around children to reimagine what America's future would look like, with all of these immigrants and Black people now competing for resources. And so you had these professionals who established these fields: social work, pediatrics, child psychology, and all of those disciplines moved through the language of race and racism, okay? And so this is a newspaper clipping of talking about the public hanging of 10 children in London between ages 7 and 11. I've got tons of these, which we'll see in our next. I don't know if y'all heard that, and maybe y'all woke up if you were nodding off. But another myth that we often hear is that spanking kids will keep them out of jail. How's that working for us? Why are we having conversations about mass incarceration? So we have this study that was done years ago by Dr. Ralph Welsh. She talks about the belt theory. I love showing this to parents because, again, traffic in data. And so what this shows is that you got blue here. These are people who are never hit, rarely hit, moderately hit, severely hit, extremely hit. So the people who are in the professional class of folks, based on this study, are those who were either never hit or moderately hit, those folks. So your chances of becoming a professional are increased here, right? Going to college, right? Same group. High school dropouts. What do we start seeing? Folks who are severely hit are in this part. Juvenile delinquency, right? The people who are never or rarely hit are right here. So that flies in the face of all these people who say, see, what's wrong with these people today is that we're not hitting kids enough. That's what's wrong with our problems. But the research shows that actually it's these folks right here. And then those who get extreme abuse end up in this category. So I like to have fun with that. Print it on a napkin and put it on the Thanksgiving table to start some fights over corporal punishment. And then we have data here that looks at the intersections of corporal punishment in schools and in crime as well. So you can take your time looking at that. I'm going to speed through here because we're getting close to time. So if you really want to talk with parents of color about this idea that hitting their kids will keep them out of jail, talk to them about mass incarceration, right? Introduce them to Michelle Alexander's The New Jim Crow. And there's also the documentary, The 13th, which is really powerful. Slavery by Another Name by Doug Blackman. And start grounding them in understanding zero tolerance and no excuses policies and the increasing criminalization of adolescents. All of these are structural issues. It's not because kids need to be hit more. And actually hitting your kid sets them up for these systemic traps. It puts them at risk for behavioral issues at schools, for the school to prison pipeline and such. I always start my conversations in communities asking parents, how many of y'all love your kids? And of course, they all raise their hands. And I say, how many of you want your kids to do well in school, to not end up in prison, to have good relationships, healthy bodies? They all raise their hands. And then I invert the questions. How many of you want your kids to end up in prison, right? To have a low IQ, to have emotional issues, to be at risk for drug abuse and other forms of violence and so forth. And sometimes I'll play around. How many of you want your kids to have gray matter reduction in the prefrontal cortex part of the brain? They might not know what that is, but it doesn't sound good. And they all say no. And then I lean forward and I say, what if there was one thing you could do? If I told you it was one thing that you could do to greatly, significantly diminish the prospects of those now negative outcomes, would you do it? And they're like, yes. And I say, stop whooping your kid. And some people squirm, they're a little uncomfortable, but they're still right there with me. Talk to them about juvenile incarceration. Look at where the United States is, and you can put an adult incarceration chart right over this and you'll see the same outcomes. We are a country that incarcerates people because it's part of the racist capitalist engine. Whipping children is not going to be an intervention in this. We talk about the foster care we talk a lot about the school to prison pipeline, but we don't talk enough about the foster care to prison pipeline. When I was writing Spare the Kids, I found that at least 2 states surveyed their adult prison populations, and they found upwards of 80% of their adult incarcerated individuals had had some kind of contact with the child welfare system, with foster care. So we've got these kids who are coming from places where they've been traumatized and abused, and sometimes they're given psychotropic medications to manage all that rather than holistic approaches to healing. And they're angry, they're traumatized, they're grieving, and their behaviors, their externalizing behaviors are not contextualized as a result of trauma, grief, and loss, but rather processed through biased lens of race or even bias against adolescents, and they end up in the juvenile justice system and the adult prison system. Hope that woke you up if you heard that as well. This is a great infographic that you can use to sort of break down the data on the school to prison pipeline and the foster care to prison pipeline as well. These are handouts that I give to parents when we were in community conversations as well. So you can download all of this. Corporal punishment in schools. People are shocked to learn that 18 states still allow this. I have to update this because Colorado was just the last to get rid of it. 200,000 kids a year corporally punished and sometimes injured. States have what's called immunity clauses, where if a teacher or a principal injures a child in the course of hitting them, they cannot be prosecuted. Yet these people are mandated reporters who are supposed to report suspicions of child abuse, but you put wooden boards in their hands. These are the states where this is still happening. This is a little history slide that you can take a look at to see how the historical echoes come through from history all the way to the present. Pay attention to this particular map here, or set of maps. So on the left side, we have the top 10 paddling states based on the data, which comes out every year. The OC Office of Civil Rights collects these. The public schools have to report each time they corporally punish a kid. I don't know if that's going to change in Trump's America. We'll see. And then we have the top 10 lynching states on the side. And they pretty much look the same, right? So you have one kind of racialized control, right, being supplanted by another. These are where the majority of Black children attend schools in the United States. If we were on a webinar style, I would ask you guys to unmute your mics and I would give you a challenge. I usually do this. I tell people I'll give them $100 if they can find the Bible verse, spare the rod, spoil the child, in there. That sentence is not in the Bible. It's just not there. And people actually try. They get some people, I don't know why people carry Bibles everywhere, but they have their Bible in a purse. And someone will stand up and read Proverbs 13:24. And I put the $100 bill back in my pocket. It's not there. It's a myth, right? So this phrase comes from a poem about two lovers. The woman who requires her male lover to allow her to flog him before they have sex. It appears in 1662, right? And so when you work with, we come into religious spaces or with, Christian parents, we have to get them to use some critical thinking skills and break down the original translations of the Bible, particularly this term rod, which is about wisdom, leadership, and protection. Right? There's a great book by L.R. Noakes. She's wonderful. We've talked, called Jesus the Gentle Parent. I highly recommend this book because it is infused with child development theory as well, and connected to more New Testament, more progressive ways that Jesus interacted with children. You can't be a follower of Jesus Christ and hit kids. Jesus never said, suffer the little children, come unto me for a whupping. He coddled children. He snuggled with them. He said that we need to treat them with respect, that you can't enter his Father's kingdom unless you are like a child. These are the Bible verses that people like to cite to defend hitting kids, right? But if you break them down, I have maybe that's a different slide. I'll have to poke that in there for y'all. But you break them down and put wisdom, leadership, direction, where you see the word rod, it changes the entire interpretation. And people don't talk about the other verses in the Bible that talk about using rods on adults. Okay. So I'm skipping through here because I literally have like 2 minutes left. So I'm going to go through this and tell you what's here. So research on how to have these conversations with Christian folks, right? So there's some articles there that talk about this. I also talk about how corporal punishment is inherited family trauma. We will review this next week. I'll actually start from this place to take you through this, to talk about epigenetics. I don't know why my slides on Canva are acting weird again. We'll revisit all of this next week. So I'm just going to, Canva does not want me to be great today. Hold on, y'all. Okay, so we're going to talk about epigenetics next week and what this all means. But I want to end by just showing you this quick clip here, if Canva will let me. I'll give it about 15 seconds. If not, we're going to go to Q&A. Okay, Canva won't let me be great. So, but you can watch it in the slides yourselves. So let me stop here because I know I have packed this with a lot of information, and let me turn this way because it's that time of the day when it looks like I'm going to heaven through the window, and open this up for conversation.
Awesome job. We have a ton of questions. And I am cognizant of the time. What are the statistics of children who were hit by parents that did not end up in the prison system? Are you aware of any research articles or statistics that discuss that?
No, there's just people who give their everyday anecdotal evidence to say I was hit as a child and I'm not in jail. So I guess start counting them.
Many white or Caucasian parents beat their children. Is there a difference, in your opinion or in your research, between white parents and Black parents who beat or hit their children? Are you aware of any differences with race?
So there are studies out there that measure attitudes. right? So by race, like who's embracing it, how often it's done. So we have that kind of data. I would say that white people tend to be a bit less public about hitting their kids, whereas Black people tend to be more open about it and celebratory, um, in terms of, you know, their justification of it. But we do have statistical breakdowns by race and also across class. A lot of people think it's just poor people in urban neighborhoods that do this. No, what makes those people's, you know, attitudes more public is because those are communities that are under hyper surveillance. My Black parents, adoptive parents, were middle class. We lived in a suburb. So, you know, they could skirt certain systems of detection in ways that people who live in urban areas that are subjected to hyper policing, you know, can. But this is something that crosses race, crosses ethnicity, and class and geography.
Social workers already face challenges when working with Black families due to systemic bias. In your opinion, how can we ensure that conversations around corporal punishment don't reinforce the harmful stereotypes or lead to further systemic harm? Are there any tips that you would recommend when engaging in these conversations?
Think about your experience here today, right? In terms of what you saw, you have to traffic in the data. You have to acknowledge people's fears. You have to speak to them. You have to ground them in history, the historical roots of this problem. Where did it come from? Listen, this didn't start with you. If you're a white um, child welfare professional talking to a Black family, a Black parent about this, one of the most provocative things you can say to them is that, look, mother, look, father, you know, whooping your Black child is the whitest thing that you can do to destroy them psychologically, physiologically, spiritually. This is not native to your people. This isn't what y'all did before you were taken from Africa, before you were enslaved, before you were subjected to these toxic systemic forms of oppression. You know, you start there. That takes a lot of courage to actually do that. But we can't shut down the conversation because we think, oh, this is going to perpetuate harmful stereotypes. White racism doesn't need a discussion about corporal punishment to traffic in harmful stereotypes about Black people. Those have existed and they're going to continue to exist. What's your mission? Is your mission to save some children, to prevent harm of kids? So when I do my presentations with folks, I center children. I center all those dead kids who, you know, are you know, end up in those reports every year. I'm not here for adult fragility and people's fears about, you know, stereotypes or harms. We have to have these uncomfortable conversations.
Children's behavior often needs to have limits. What strategies outside of corporal punishment do you recommend or are you familiar with?
So I let people know I'm not a parenting expert. That's not what I do. I'm a child advocate. My work focuses on, you know, the bodily autonomy and rights of children. But there's a ton of stuff out there that, you know, focuses on things like conscious parenting, you know, gentle parenting. There are great books like Parenting the Teenage Brain. There's a whole list of great works that are out there and websites. You can even use AI. The beauty of, you know, there are ethical ways to use AI. So if you're a parent who is having some issue, let's say it's, you know, my child is throwing a tantrum. Okay, you want to get to the why behind it. You can actually go in these AI systems and type in your question and say, my kid is doing X, Y, and Z. Help me understand why. And it will give you solid, developmentally appropriate, scientifically grounded information to help you, you know, recontextualize your child's behavior and get to the why behind it and some actual strategies in like 30 seconds. But here's the thing, a lot of times when people ask for strategies, I often tell them the starting place is not with your child, it's with you. If you are triggered by your child's behavior, it's one thing is that you may not be grounded in brain science and understanding children's development. You may be reacting from an old, unhealed place. So if you were somebody who, when you were a child and you acted a certain way, or you broke something in the house, you remember the way your parents, responded. And so people often parent the way they were parented. And so their nervous system gets triggered and they actually perpetuate the same kind of stress that their parents did. If you're hitting your kid, if you're yelling, you need some therapy. You need to heal yourself, your nervous system first, to understand why you're reacting this way, because we can give you strategies all day long. They can be grounded in science. I give you a whole bibliography. You can watch YouTube videos, podcasts, but until you rewire your brain and your nervous system, not going to work.
It's very valuable information. We're going to continue with the Q&A portion, but Irene is going to drop the evaluation for today's webinar in the chat as I'm cognizant of the time. It will also be emailed out to you. Please know that it does close next Friday. You have 7 days to complete it. It is a requirement to receive CEs. We're going to continue for the next 8 minutes for those of you that have questions, and we have Dr. Patton with us. But in the interest of time, please complete the evaluation, and we thank you so much for coming. For those of you joining us next week, we look forward to seeing you. And if not, as always, we hope to see you at the next one. Thank you so much for coming. Dr. Patton, is corporal punishment different among different cultures?
Yes, the ways, I mean, it's all violent across cultures. Let's just be clear about that. But the different techniques vary. So the types of things that people do to children, it could be kneeling on rice. It could be, the types of objects that people hit children. The reasons why parents hit their kids can be culturally inflected in terms of the justifications. So yes, it does vary in terms of cultural context. And we should be aware of those when we're talking with families about why they do what they did or how they actually did what they did to a child's body.
I was struck by the information about the number of children killed by their parents. Do you have a sense, or have you come across anything that discusses step parents, or within the context of intimate partner violence, perhaps a child trying to protect a parent and they inadvertently die? It's a lot of information that I'm trying to digest, but I just wanted to ask.
So what you're asking for, and these are all great questions, is microdata, is a sort of the situational context. Unfortunately, the annual child maltreatment reports that come out each year, they'll tell you things like, the sex of the perpetrator. They'll tell you if, let's say, it was a mother and a male accomplice, right, who were involved, mother and child, father, that sort of thing. I'm trying to think what else they give you in terms of demographic. They also foster care setting, which is the smallest proportion of folks who are perpetrating the abuse or even fatality. So another myth that is, if you report child abuse and a kid ends up in the foster care, they're going to experience this abuse. The data just doesn't bear that out. Although we do know that corporal punishment does take place in some foster care settings, which is equally disturbing. But in terms of the deeper micro data and contextual stuff, I've not seen that, like some sort of holistic study that breaks all of that down. You literally have to do a sampling of, I don't know, you go to one county's records and take a look at, the causes and looking at the actual case files to be able to bear that out.
Would we be able to use one slide from your presentation if we cite you?
Listen, I am not one of these presenters, these academics who are like, you better cite me, don't use my word. I just don't. I'm not throwing shade at people who do, but I do this work because people like y'all saved my life. And I'm not being hyperbolic when I say this. I walk around with extension cord marks on my face. I got a broken wrist that never healed. I have scars all over my body. And because people like y'all spoke up, we're not bullied by the cultural, arguments, who saw a child who was vulnerable, right? I'm alive today and I'm here to do this. My mission is to help people, to help us heal, not just African Americans, but all groups of people, whether you're from a marginalized community or from communities that have historically oppressed folks. I have a vested interest in making all of these groups treat children better. So I want you to take these slides, make new ones. I don't care. Redesign them if you don't like my design. Integrate the information, right? This is how healing happens. And this work that I do is ancestral. I'm sorry I went on this very evocative rant just now, but please, this is why I share them. Take them, practice them, take them in your churches, in your clinical settings. Do a presentation at the Thanksgiving table and start a fight, right? Please do this, because when I was a kid, I wish that my adoptive mother had been able to go to somebody's office, to a workshop, to a church, somewhere where somebody told her this information. And maybe I wouldn't have these marks on my face. Maybe I wouldn't have ended up in foster care. So please embrace this. And if you have questions, any questions about any of this, you can write me. I'm happy to answer them. So yes, use it all.
Thank you so much. I am cognizant of the time. Irene has dropped in the evaluation link. As always, please make sure you complete it. We're going to take 2 more questions. For those of you that have questions, feel free to enter them into the Q&A. Myself and Irene compile them on the back end. Dr. Patton is back with us next week. And if we have time and or space, we will make sure to get to them. Are you aware or do you have any data on other races or ethnic groups outside of the Black community?
I guess that's a broad question.
It's a broad question.
So is it data on child abuse fatalities, data on, yes, those are annual numbers that are taken at the state level and national levels in terms of the annual child maltreatment reports. If you have a more specific question about that, you can email it to me and I will give you the links. I will point you to the research where you can have a look at that.
Thank you. This is a provocative question, but we'll end with it. Do you think that it's possible that even though my kids say they forgive me for using a wooden spoon in the 70s, that they have healed? Both have been to therapy, both of my children and myself. I was also abused. I'm deeply regretful, but in my Italian family, this was a cultural norm, and I had no skills while being pregnant at 17. I have had many years of therapy, but I have never really forgiven myself.
Wow.
I know.
Whoever wrote that, I want to thank you for being vulnerable and sharing that. And, I want you to get to a place where you do forgive yourself, right? A lot of people grow up with, these histories of trauma and they repeat. They do what they know. You didn't know any better. But here you are now, someone who did better, who apologized to your children, right? Who took accountability for it. You were 17 years old. Your brain wasn't even done developing yet. That happens at what, 24, 25 years old, right? And then you're a mom. You're still a kid as a mom. You were in survival mode. And this is, you were acting from a place of trauma, not intentional, evil, like you were trying to, destroy your children. So, you don't use the word forgive on yourself. Heal. You are healing, right? And that's a lifelong process. And the fact that your kids, in their own words, told you that they forgive you is everything. It's everything. People ask me all the time, have I forgiven my adoptive parents? And I tell them no, because I had to first do the work of surviving, just like you did, right? I had to survive. I had to stay alive every single day, protect my body, protect my heart, right? So I was in that survival mode. I had to disassociate from my body to stay alive. I couldn't allow myself, to feel anything. And so I finally ran away. I was 12 years old, right? And so I had to do another kind of survival in foster care, right? And get my education and try to be a good kid, all of that stuff. Get therapy. I got therapy very early on. I was, throughout my entire teenage years, I got therapy to help rewire my brain and nervous system. So I got an early start. And so I had to do this continued work in my adult years to heal from adoption, because adoption is also trauma, to deal with the reunification with my biological relatives. It's a lot of work healing, right? And trauma changes you. It changes you, right? It changes the brain. It changes the way you show up in the world, right? It changes as you cross different developmental milestones in your life. Do not ask survivors if they have forgiven their abusers, because that is yet another layer of work, another burden of work that they should not have to do. Ask about atonement. And what you, Mama, just talked about was atonement, acknowledging where your hurt and pain came from, and that you did hurt your children, but you've done this reparative work to the point where they've told you that they forgive you. So if your kids tell you they forgive you, believe them.
I think that was extremely powerful. Thank you to whoever asked that question. I hope it was inspiring to all of us here. I know Dr. Patton's answer was comprehensive, and she is back with us next week. Those of you that have questions, put them in the Q&A. We will compile them, and if we have time next week, please give us some time to email out the slides as well as the evaluation. You will receive those. And as always, you'll be added into our listserv if you don't already exist, if you're a new attendee for future presentations. Dr. Patton, thank you so much. We sincerely appreciate it. We will see you next week for part 2. And everybody,
so much.
Wherever you are, stay safe. Until next time, my friends. Take care.